Alright guys, welcome back to F1 News. Yet more pressure being piled on Sergio Perez going into the Hungarian Grand Prix, with his former teammate Jenson Button saying that if Perez fails to score points again this weekend, he will be axed from Red Bull ASAP and they will get somebody else into the car. This comes at the same time of Zach Brown and McLaren effectively saying, yeah, with Perez underperforming, really opens the door for us. How long can Red Bull hang on to this? Will Perez turn it around this weekend? Because his record in Hungary is not exactly ideal either. Very much interested in your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. Unlikely to get a video for you guys out tomorrow because I'm flying all the way to Dallas for an event over there, not, Formula 1 related, but so it's going to be really difficult time zone wise to actually get anything done tomorrow, but I'll do my best over the coming days to keep you guys updated. This, of course, is the Hungarian Grand Prix trophy for this weekend that Lando Norris broke last year, so we'll see if that happens again. And yeah, race week for another back-to-back couple of races here for Hungary, and then Spa after that. Thought the Rubik's Cube here was a nice touch because, Mr. Rubik, who invented the cube, was, of course, Hungarian, as far as I'm aware. He must be, obviously, they wouldn't have done this otherwise, would they? Let's talk about some upgrades, though. Mercedes have some things to bring to their car, but so do Ferrari. The concern is here for Ferrari, they've really got to nail this one. They have some upgrades here for their car, or really, they're going to bring what they brought for the last couple of races, and they're going to try and figure out what's actually going to work. Now, the conditions look like they're going to be hotter. Certainly they were in Silverstone, which probably, hurts the Mercedes theoretically compared to the Ferrari. So we'll see if it really helps their car this weekend. But the feeling is that they should be in line for a bit of a rebound Ferrari, but they'll bring both packages, the Imola spec, the Barcelona spec, just to see what happens here. And, the new one really needs to deliver now because they tried it in Silverstone. Of course, they tried it in Barcelona. Silverstone, they decided due to the nature of the circuit, they literally had to abandon it and just go back to using the older version. They couldn't get it set up correctly, or maybe it's simply not good enough. So Hungary, they have to deliver, and if that new version doesn't work on their car, they will have to abandon it during this weekend and therefore for the rest of the season. And they do apparently have a plan B to replace it in the near term, but that would be a plan B version which is more limiting in the slow corners, which is where they tried to improve their car performance, but it's backfired with their high-speed bouncing. So yeah, big weekend here coming up for Ferrari, because if these new upgrades don't work and if bouncing is back again in some of these higher speed corners and they can't dial it out on setup, then the development of their car has major concerns for the rest of the season, and of course the seasons to come, not even just next year but the following year as well, because if Ferrari are one of the only teams, it seems now, not to quite have the full grip on the ground effect era regulations, on the porpoising effect, on these other phenomena, then that doesn't really set them up so well when 2026 comes around, where ground effect is still most certainly going to be a thing. Red Bull have upgrades though as well. They brought a couple of things over the last couple of rounds which haven't really done that much in terms of the pecking order in the position. Now, it's got to be said, Verstappen won here in 22, and he absolutely dominated the race here last year. It was unbelievably emphatic. Hamilton got pole, but in the Grand Prix, Verstappen finished, I think, 33 seconds ahead of Norris and 37 seconds ahead of Checo Perez, and we'll discuss that here in a second. So Red Bull were really good here last year. They should be good here again, but as are Mercedes here historically, McLaren should be good as well. Who knows about Ferrari? These are the questions, but as Helmut Marko says, of course, it's crucial to get into the right window with the car, but we are still not the fastest car at the moment. We need to correct that with the upgrade. So the intention is for Red Bull to return to being the fastest car, but it's going to be far from easy to achieve that. Just quickly on Mercedes, this is quite a telling comment here from James Allison just on the whole Hamilton move to Ferrari, as he actually makes it very clear. I was aware of the nature of the contract we'd offered, and the nature of the contract we'd offered permitted the move to happen. So if it happened, we shouldn't be surprised, because that was explicitly a thing that we were prepared to happen, or we wouldn't have put it as an option, right? Which is, the 1+1 that Hamilton could break off if he wanted to, as could Mercedes. And for all the talk about, well, Hamilton's made a mistake leaving Mercedes going to Ferrari, and sure, you can argue that right now. I think in terms of the off-track stuff, it was quite clear that Mercedes wanted to consolidate their future a little bit more and think about Antonelli and think about Verstappen potentially, and therefore Hamilton wasn't necessarily part of their plans in the medium term, which you can very much argue whether that should or should not have been the case, but I think that is probably the reality of the situation, that they were looking at Hamilton's future in the team anyway, and despite all that he's done for the team, and therefore they allowed the contracts to work both ways, and Hamilton was the one that decided to pull the trigger on in the end. Let's talk about the driver market though. Charles Leclerc with a few interesting words here on Ollie Bearman. Behrman right. Of course, Ferrari teammate briefly back at the Jeddah Grand Prix at the start of the season, but since then he's now driving for Haas next year. That's now been confirmed. I thought it was interesting words from Leclerc in the sense that he says, like, Behrman must be given the space and the room to make the mistakes he needs to make. And it's interesting that Leclerc would say that. It is kind of like a Charles thing to say, given, his own I am stupid moments or whatever in the recent past. But yeah, as he says, Behrman needs to make mistakes, because by making mistakes you find the limits, you find what you're capable of. I think for rookies, the general feeling is if you're crashing and you're slow and you're not showing any signs of improvements, get off the grid unless you're a pay driver, basically. But rookies, you can accept crashes, you can accept mistakes, if between those mistakes they're getting faster, they're getting more competitive, and I think that's what Behrman needs to do for next season. I think he will be given the leeway to do this at Haas. There's not going to be crazy expectations there for his first season. They've got Ocon in as well, probably more experienced driver alongside him. That's at least the present rumour. So I think Behrman maybe would have been not given so much time under Steiner, but I think the new setup does help the rookies a bit more in that team. I do wonder, like, let's say Antonelli gets a drive, either at Mercedes or Williams or somewhere like that for next season. Will he be given the same leeway that Behrman may be at Haas? I guess that's a question, because, the media pressure on Antonelli is probably going to be greater than it will be on Behrman, despite the fact that, Behrman, well, I guess it works both ways, really. Behrman, young British driver, like, he's obviously going to be facing the heat as well. And that's one of the other off-track factors that can make drivers struggle a little bit more when they first come into the sport. There's, not just driving the car very fast, there's other off-track stuff to think about as well. Zhou Guanyu, though, his time is probably going to be coming to an end. I think this makes sense. Like, I'm in some ways surprised that he got 3 years in the sport. I think that there's a good argument to say that he shouldn't have done, and over the last really 18 months, Bottas has schooled him every single weekend. Difficult races such as, China and Canada, stuff like that. He was kind of just nowhere, and the 25-year-old needs to deliver big performances now, and it's probably not going to happen, and therefore he's probably going to be gone. Carlos Sainz, though, he of course is in a much stronger position than Zhou Guanyu, but he's still not rushing his decision. He's still really waiting to see what happens here, and it's risky. Absolutely, it's risky, but it may pay off, because he's clearly looking, I would say, at the two premium seats that could be available, one of which at Mercedes and one of which at Red Bull is not impossible as it stands. It seems unlikely, just because I don't think Red Bull will want to do the Sainz Verstappen thing again because of the drama that caused behind the scenes with the respective parents. But then again, what if Verstappen leaves, right? Like, what if he decides to leave? Maybe Sainz think there's a chance that he does, to go to Mercedes next year. And if he does, then Sainz is potentially a shoo-in to fight for next year's World Championship, because the Red Bull is certainly still going to be a capable car next year. So that's why he's waiting so long. But on the Red Bull side, we've got to talk Sergio Perez, right? This is Arvid Lindblad, by the way, who's been killing it lately in Formula 3. Of course, he's done the other rookie categories as well. And he's done very well so far. Maybe not the strongest F3 kind of, bracket you're ever going to see, but nonetheless, he's done very well and has shown to be, of all the Red Bull rookie drivers, probably the one that is most promising to get onto the grid in F1 at some point. And actually, Helmut Marko says he's only 16. We're delighted that you can now drive F1 again at 17, because they changed the rules recently, right, to allow Antonelli potentially to drive at 17. But actually, as it was with Verstappen and Red Bull, it may be true with Lindblad as well. They, clearly Helmut Marko, maybe he's half joking a little bit, but, he raises the question to say, hey, this guy's been killing it down there in the Jubilee formulas. Why not put him in an F1 car at 17? Because we're capable of doing so now. We're allowed to do so. Is he the next Verstappen? Well, he's Red Bull's best bet at that over the next couple of years, certainly if Verstappen were to leave. And I'm sure we'll discuss that in more detail over the coming days. But Zach Brown talking about Sergio Perez and says, yeah, McLaren, we can definitely fight for the Constructors' title. Perez underperforming is what is opening the window for us. And that has been the big question of the last couple of weeks. Perez has had a stinking few races. The triple header we just had was awful. And now there's a double header upcoming. And, this stint of European races has not been particularly kind to Sergio Perez in the past. Even you remember last year, right, where Perez, he was under pressure coming into the Hungarian Grand Prix last year, wasn't he? And then he spun out in the first part of practice, like he put a wheel onto the gravel or whatever on the left-hand side onto the grass, and then he spun out up the hill at the start of Sector 2. And there was this famous shot of Max Verstappen here driving past his teammate who's just binned it in the wall during free practice 1. So yeah, it wasn't ideal last year, but of course, Perez got to keep his seat for next season, and according to the contract they've given him, for the next 2 years in a row as well. Although that's almost certainly not going to happen anymore. Jenson Button, former teammate of Sergio Perez, his opinion: it's pretty rare that Button is this strong on things. Like, he's usually very, clear. I wouldn't, he's definitely level-headed, but it's pretty rare for Button to criticize someone excessively, I would say. He's usually very cordial and friendly and tries to look on the bright side. But in this case, even Button, who's obviously, of all the people who can comment on this, one of the best placed, one of the, people whose opinion is going to be respected the most, even maybe by Red Bull themselves on some level if they hear this quote. And as Button says, massive issue. Silverstone was a terrible weekend. For McLaren to take this many points out of them is a big deal. He needs to be scoring some points at least, even if he's not directly behind Max. They can't let this go on forever. I think in the next race, as in Hungary, if he's not scoring points again, soon enough they've got to get him out of the car and put somebody else in. Not a nice feeling for a driver, it's horrible, but for them, the championship is important, right? And these are his race results this year. It started so well again. I mean, he wasn't winning this year as he did last year, but you just have a look at this. 18 points, so he came second, fifth in Australia. Wasn't great, but, the car was really good back then. Second in Japan, third in China, fourth in Miami, and then things started to go downhill, right? And even his grid placings were respectable as well. But then, obviously, things started to go wrong. 8th place in Miami, 8th place in Imola, and after that, 18th in Monaco, 18th in Canada. Okay, 18th, crash, but you know what I'm saying, right? No points, 8th, 7th, and then no points again at Silverstone, and you can even look at the qualifying performance and see the delta there, which is not pretty either. So, yeah, that's Sergio Perez's performance so far this season. I also wanted to quickly mention, right, his just performance against Jenson Button back in the day, because Button generally got along relatively well with most of his teammates in his time, but Perez was kind of one of the teammates that I wouldn't say they didn't, see eye to eye, but if my memory serves correctly, they weren't exactly the best of friends. But intrigued your thoughts in the comments below if you know more about Perez and Button's relationship, whether there's anything in that really. But in the end, for McLaren, when they raced between the two guys back in 2013, in the end, it was 73 points to Button, 49 to Perez, and yeah, you guys can see his standing, so like the lower is actually better here. And then you see the numbers here actually, so Button in the blue, Perez in the red, to see who was the best at the start on average, who was the best at the finish on average, who was best in terms of points over the course of the season. These were the starting positions for Perez and for, well, it says Perez again here, but I'm guessing, okay, no, Button and Perez for final race and starting grid positions. I'll leave all this link down below as always, but yeah, that was the championship standings back in 2013. It's interesting to look at really, just that back then they weren't, that differently matched. Obviously, Button's a world champion right back in 2009, but Perez at the time was reasonably competitive there. And there was also another interesting quote I wanted to mention here, that this was from Jenson Button back in 2019, and he was talking about his teammates, and he said, like, my fastest teammate was Lewis, my most complete teammate in some ways was Fernando. He says that Rubens was technically above the rest, Rubens Barrichello, very talented when it came to setting up a car. And then he mentioned Checo at the time and said that Checo surprised him. It was his speed on how on certain days he could be very quick, but certain circuits didn't work for him. Circuits that had front limitation did not work for him, and gotta be said, Hungary is more of a front-limited circuit, but circuits that had rear limitation like Bahrain worked very well for him and was extremely quick. I don't know if he actually understood why that was, but it was just the way that it was for him. There's always been talk about his driving style and that sort of stuff that kind of leans to this effect. But yeah, he basically said that Checo surprised him, not exactly in a good or a bad way, but kind of just like, yeah, maybe expected Perez to be faster in some ways than he was on normal tracks, and obviously we're seeing the results of that today. The problem I think for Perez in some ways is that it's not like Hungary's been a great circuit for him. As I said, last year he crashed out in free practice 1. These are his results there all time. When he was teammates with Button, of course, he finished 9th. He qualified 9th, finished 9th back in 2013. Then he was with Force India, couple of retirements, no points scored. His best results last year was 3rd. Like, it's the first time he ever scored a podium. And again, that was after qualifying 9th in a rocket ship. He, fair play, got up to 3rd in the Grand Prix, still finished behind Norris, and was about 40 seconds, 37 seconds behind his teammate who won the Grand Prix. So it's not a great track for Perez, and this year the Red Bull isn't the rocket ship around the Hungaroring as it was last year. Probably not, and maybe it is. But, so Perez just needs a big bounce back, and it's not been a great circuit for him, really. Even 2022, he was 5th, qualified 11th, finished 5th. So, the last couple of years don't paint the greatest picture for Perez, and that is obviously a serious concern when it comes down to the fact that we believe, at least there are rumours to this effect, that there is a contract clause in place which effectively says, look Sergio, if you're more than 100 points behind Max after Spa, you can be gone and we probably will get rid of you. He's currently like 137 points behind Max going into Hungary, and he's not going to overturn that deficit. So then you look to the next generation or the next set of drivers and you think, okay, who's going to be Red Bull's next driver? Because it's probably not going to be Perez at this rate, and if Button's words have anything to go by, they will likely choose one of these guys. There's talk about Lawson maybe not quite impressing them as they would have liked him to at their Silverstone test. Yuki, for whatever reason, just isn't really on their agenda. So I actually think Danny Rick is potentially the most likely here, as remarkable as that is, given his last couple of years. But, Carlos Sainz, I'm sure, is going to be looking over and thinking, hang on, guys, Horner, what do you think about me? Because it's not like he's slacking at the moment. And then, of course, with a guy like Sainz, this was my kind of theory, really, on the whole Verstappen thing, is that if you are Horner and you're concerned that Max might leave to go to Mercedes, as again, there's been some speculation that he could, he can buy this time. He doesn't have to, make a decision quickly. Of course, he's got a contract, let's not forget, with Red Bull until 2028. But the rumour has it that if Helmut Marko decides to leave Red Bull and go to somewhere else, just basically resigns, then Max is free to go based on the contract clause. So that apparently Helmut Marko snuck in there. So big drama on that a couple of months ago. But it does mean that Max is effectively free to leave if he wishes to. And if I'm Christian Horner and I'm seeing that possibility, I'm thinking, do I really want to sign, let's say, a Ricciardo or something and allow, Sainz to go elsewhere, and then all of a sudden, let's say he leaves, and then I'm stuck with Perez and Ricciardo, or I have to put Ricciardo and Lawson or Ricciardo and Yuki or something in the car. It's maybe not what I really want to do at Red Bull, and then maybe they could quickly try and get Piastri or try and get Albon or something, but I don't know how successful they'd be at achieving that. So they've got to be, I think, a little bit concerned about Verstappen's potential consideration. Seems unlikely that he will, but if he does, it obviously would cause chaos, especially for Red Bull themselves. But that's the thing, if you're Red Bull, it's if we pull the trigger and drop Perez for Sainz, then that kind of might tell Verstappen, wow, this is interesting, right? That he's maybe not been given the priority that he would usually expect in the team. It might even force Verstappen into a decision to leave if they were to sign Sainz. But if you don't sign Sainz, then you run the risk of Max leaving anyway, or simply just not having the best alternative for Perez. So some interesting questions for the Red Bull guys to answer, but very much interested in your thoughts on all this stuff in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.